Hello, and welcome to Real World Leadership, where we're bringing our best selves to life and leadership. I'm your host, Susan Johnson, founder of Truth Enterprise Partners, a talent development and coaching firm based in Atlanta, where we focus on executive coaching, leadership development, and diversity and inclusion. Our vision is to inspire a world where authenticity, diversity, and truth are valued, and our aim is to bring out the true potential in people. It's what drives us to get up every day, and we hope to bring out the true potential in you. So thank you all for joining us. Today at Real World Leadership, we do have a guest speaker on the topic of communication. It's part of our series devoted to leader attributes. Brian Mora is with us today. He's an executive leader that I met during my time at a financial services firm where we're developing leader talent. Our professional lives have crossed, and a couple of times actually. He's a leader who remains consistently authentic with who he is, but he stands for what he is, and he does the right thing. Brian's approach and his attention in communication and reception, and his attention to communication is evident, and it's authentically what connects him to people. So I'm glad he's here with us to share with us his superpower of communication so we can learn more of how to apply this to our leader skills as a leader attribute. So Brian, thank you and welcome to Real World Leadership.
Susan, thanks for having me. This is exciting. Happy to be here and happy to do it.
Good. What else would you like to share as part of our introduction today?
You know, it's funny. I've been a leader by professional title for 20 years this coming Monday, meaning in my professional work, I've had some type of leadership or managerial title for literally 20 years in a couple of days. But when I now have the benefit of a couple of decades of leadership experience, what I've come to realize about leadership is it's probably within all different facets of our life and in society. It's probably one of, if not the most sought after attribute or characteristic that's lacking in so many parts of our life and in our world. I look at things from coaching my kids' sports to I had a funny incident a couple of weeks ago where the gate to a community that I was trying to enter wasn't working, and it's been dysfunctional for many years. That's a leadership issue of the homeowners association. And so when I get excited to talk about leadership, and specifically today talk about communication and leadership, it's not just for an audience who may have a leadership title at their job of manager or VP or boss. It could be if you're part of a nonprofit or your church organization or you're part of an HOA. Leadership is everywhere, and it's really the glue that holds our life and our society together if you really think about it.
Very interesting and very true. I would agree with that. We all lead, even if we're leading ourselves. You know, we got to start somewhere with leadership, and we all play a role in leadership. So did you get the gate fixed?
I'm not sure that gate's going to get fixed unless I run to be on the HOA, and I'm not up for that. My life is pretty busy right now, as we all are.
Okay, we got to lead up to get the gate fixed for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. So I always do this icebreaker. It's kind of a tradition. So I'm going to ask you an icebreaker question. So we're going to pick a card. This will allow us to get to know you a little bit more personally as well. So the question I have for you is, what's your favorite comfort food?
Oh, good. I thought it was going to be like, what's my most embarrassing moment? And I was going to be really scared. That's a great question. My favorite comfort food. As you can see on the slide, so one of my hobbies outside of work is I'm an endurance athlete, and you know, fortunately or unfortunately, have to take nutrition pretty seriously with that. If I'm going to really indulge, Susan, there's probably nothing better than a heaping stack of pancakes. I'm more of a breakfast all day type person. I could have breakfast in the morning, lunch, or dinner. You can bring me pancakes, waffles, or French toast. Anything that's in that realm is to my liking.
Well, that's a good choice. And I know that your health is very important. As you're a triathlete, you're very competitive in achievement. So you don't get many pancakes in your life. But if you're going to indulge, it would be pancakes. Good. All right, thank you for sharing and giving some insights to our audience, a little bit more about you. Let's go ahead and dive into our topic. Our topic today is communication. It's a key leader attribute for sure. Communication, verbal, written, nonverbal, and even executive presence come to mind when I think about influencing and leading towards strategy, vision, culture. When you're building a culture as a leader, expectations towards results, you have to have communication with that. So when you're leading, you got to use your voice, you got to use your words, nonverbals as you're connecting with people as well to influence towards the results that you want. So unless you're like my mother, she could just communicate, you know, she could
With a
just
look,
walk in a room
with a look.
with a look, just walking in a room. So that's communication too. And I just want our audience to be aware of we're always communicating and to be thoughtful about how we're going about it as a leader, which you do so well, given that's your superpower, right? So today, I want to make sure that we cover off on a few things for our audience. Influencing with communication, and what I mean by that is really around your messaging, listening as a communicator as well, tone, and that communication toward action. Reception, because if you have a message and it's not being received, you're not really communication. It's two-way, right? Presence and tone, and what I call surround sound, full circle surround sound communication. That's when you're leveraging all these different types of communication simultaneously, written, verbal, nonverbal, etc. So first things first, let's talk message. Whether written, verbal, or even unspoken, thoughtful leaders are thinking of the message they want to convey, and they're imagining how it's going to be received and how they want people feeling about the message toward the action that they are influencing them toward what they want to happen, right? So tell us about your point of view or your process around message.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. Many of your listeners and just many of us, universally have heard the adage that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So believe it or not, I think if you were to do a word association game and say, when you see the word communication, what does that mean to you? Most people would start to define what I say, what I write, my tone, my body language. And I think the first component of communication is actually the listening part. In that if, Susan, I'm trying to influence you towards something or understand something, especially in the world that we live in today with so much stimulus and distraction, we're on a computer between the two of us right now. If you're talking to me and I'm looking over in the other direction, the first thing that you're thinking is Brian even listening? If I'm down and you kind of see my thumbs moving and I'm texting or looking at social media, that is communication. You're trying to convey something to me and I'm not even listening. So to me, the first ground rule is and we're all human beings. I'm as susceptible to an email alert, a text message alert, multiple things I'm managing. How do you get some inner discipline to stay in the moment and listen to the thing that your audience, or if it's an audience of one or an audience of 100, that your audience is saying? That's kind of ground rule number one for me when I think about messaging. Number two is, and I've made a career on this, and I'm always still, even after 20 years, blown away by how impressed people are with proactive communication or timely response rate. I think we have become accustomed to, in order for me to get something, I'm going to have to follow up with you. And I'm like surprised if you proactively communicate to me or if it's timely. If I send you an email or I leave you a voicemail and you get back to me relatively quickly, that's a surprise moment in our society today. So I've tried to just separate myself a bit by saying I'm going to be proactive and build systems to follow up. And I'm going to respond to things timely. I'll give you two last ones on this one is, I think each communicator, when you start to put yourself in the shoes of the other person to ask yourself, how are they going to hear my message? You have to think about what the word authentic actually means. Like, what are the tenets of authentic communication? Because it's an easy thing for me to say, well, all of you listeners, be authentic in your communication. And everybody nods and says, yes, I should be authentic. But what are the tenets of authenticity? To me, there's a few. One is, how transparent are you? Do you make people feel like you're giving them all of the information, or Are you treating them like, you're in possession of a lot of info and you're only giving them what they might need to know? So the ability to convey real transparency, the ability to have empathy and convey a level of sincerity and a level of humility. Depending on who your listeners are, most who are in positions professionally of leadership have accomplished some things. They have resumes that are noteworthy. You do and I do. How do I communicate in a way that isn't reading my resume or my superiority, but rather level sets myself with my audience? That's, to me, some of the tenets of authenticity. And then the last one is about being clear and concise. And I'll just tell you that you and I've known each other a long time. One of the things I've worked really hard on in my personal communication style is I had a pattern and a habit earlier in my life of saying something and then almost repeating myself. And I got some really valuable feedback from a mentor who said to me, when you convey something, it's good. When you step back and repeat yourself and make the audience listen to it a second time, you're sort of conveying to them either you weren't confident in what you said the first time, so you need to say it again, or you think they're not intelligent enough to understand it the first time, so it needs to be repeated. So we all have these different components to our communication. A big one for me was this sort of long-windedness and repeating myself multiple times. And I needed to zone in on how can I get more crisp and concise so that the audience isn't sort of tuning out and rolling their eyes as they listen to me say something multiple times over.
Very well said. I cannot even add to that. Just like great points, Brian. I love the fact that you're listening first. You're proactive in communication and building systems, to make sure that you're communicating and following up. Authenticity. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Being truthful, transparent, sharing as much as you can. Empathy, having that humility and that just human aspect to kind of match up with the audience. So you're not putting yourself on a pedestal. I just love that. Clear and concise, must have that. And, I love the story you shared about the mentor. I think people have been told, you tell them what you're going to say, then you say it, then you tell them again. I think everybody learned that. And it doesn't work necessarily all the time. It can make your audience feel as if they're being dumbed down or something to that effect. So
yeah, I kind of subscribe more to be brief, be brilliant, be gone.
Okay, a new mantra, new way. Yes, but it's interesting. That was something I think that was taught to a lot of folks, and and they may still be doing that too. So clearly communication is your superpower. So we're going to go ahead and agree that if you're doing it that way, it sounds like a great way to go about it. So let's talk a bit about reception, because communication is an exchange. You talked about listening up front. So you can know what your audience is needing, so you can deliver and match up to that audience and listening. And again, nothing more distracting for someone that's not, paying attention when you're trying to communicate. It sends a message, clearly in communication. So what's your thought or your point of view to ensure that receptivity, that exchange has occurred toward the outcome that you're seeking?
It's funny, this has been a journey for me as well. And I watched this journey in other, newer and growing and maturing leaders in lots of walks of life. For a long time in my career, if you would have asked me how a particular conversation or meeting went, and my response was that went really well, I now look back and realize that my measurement of it, quote unquote, going well was whether or not I liked what I said or not. Right? So that meeting was great. That sales pitch was great. That conversation was great. Why? Well, I really liked what I had to say. That's not really the measurement of success, right? As identified in the second bullet point, the measurement of success is the audience who I was communicating to. Did they get what they needed? Whether it was just information, whether it was influence, whatever it may be, did they get that? And the only way I've ever been able to measure whether or not my communication was successful was a combination of two things: checking in verbally with questions and getting answers that are confirming in nature. The other is the actions that people take, because just the verbal confirmation that someone says, if I say to you, so Susan, was this conversation in the meeting today helpful to you? And how was it helpful? Even if you answer me in the affirmative, if you're supposed to take some action, change some behavior, do something as a result of it, and you don't do it, we can all agree that that failed, right? No matter what the conversation was. So I've become fairly disciplined in trying to always do the first step there, which is, take enough time to ask, is there anything else that you had wanted to talk about today? Was there anything that I didn't cover for you or accomplish for you or discuss with you, so that I at least know leaving a conversation that whatever I intended, I've got either things that would set the stage for another conversation or meeting that has to happen, or I've got confirmation that you have what you need. And then you have to observe. You've got to see, does especially if action is applicable, does action take place?
Yes, very good. Check in with questions, check for understanding is what I often do too. And then that whole notion of, are they doing what I asked them to do? Did they agree to it and take action? And also asking questions in terms of what's unclear, what else do they need toward that action to make it move. Clearly, some good steps and some good ideas there. So presence and tone, I mentioned my mother. She just has presence. She could just walk in a room and have a presence. And that comes across in communication as well. How is your presence lending toward your message, your credibility? How's that work for you?
Well, I think it's a couple of different things. I think a lot of people, similar to how we started with, if we did word association for communication, I think if we did word association for presence, people would start to think, that part of great communication is maybe having this like larger than life aura around you, that when you walk in a room, you change the tone or the temperature of the room just by your physical presence. That can certainly be part of communication. I'll give a specific example that I think is important, when knowing that a lot of people, their form of communication may be standing in front of an audience.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to observe a new member of my leadership team do a presentation. This is almost about a year ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me for feedback at the end of the presentation. He said, how do you think I did? He was in front of an audience of about 100 people. And I said, everything you said verbally, the words you said and communicated, perfect. I wouldn't change a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you were in front of a really large audience and you stood all the way over on one side of the room, kind of almost back in the corner, and your physical posture in the room said to the audience perhaps that you weren't comfortable standing right in the middle of the room and commanding the room. Not a huge deal and not terribly unexpected for a new presenter and a new leader. But to me, I think about presence in a couple of different capacities. One is if you're communicating to a broad audience and you're standing on a stage, your physical posture, presence, where you stand, how you move, people are not only hearing your words, that's a venue where they're physically observing you.
Yeah.
Then there's a completely different component of presence and tone, which is the world we live in today. So much tries to get accomplished via efficiency through an email or through a text message. And also know that, especially when sometimes stress is high or emotions are high, a lot of people's format to take out the stress and emotion is to fire off that email and say, Susan, I'm so upset with your decision and this and this and this. And sometimes it can feel, without knowing that person's tone, it can start to really feel like an attack. Then you have to make a decision about your tone and your presence of, do you respond in the same way? Do you take to email? Do you take to text? Or do you pause and say, maybe a conversation with this person would be better? So there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm trying to always be really mindful of, if I'm over a computer, people can still see me and hear me, but they're relying much more on what they hear. If I'm in front of an audience, they're getting a lot of what they see, not just what they hear. So how do I bring my physical presence and look at all the different things, if you've ever been through any kind of public speaker training in terms of posture and body language and those kinds of things. But then I think a huge part of this presence and tone is how we deal with electronic communications. And when do you opt to pick up the phone and actually talk to somebody versus send 5 paragraphs back in a text or an email that could have been a phone conversation? And now I don't have to interpret and wonder, what did she mean by that? Or what was he trying to say there? And I put my own lens on those things.
Mm, there was a lot to unpack there, and very, very important to distinguish between in-person and written and electronic communications, texting, all that technology that we use today, and thinking about tone and the presence you want to have. I see you being very thoughtful about that, whether you're speaking or responding back in written communications. And it's important to, like you said, to pause, determine what's the most appropriate means of communication to get the message you want conveyed. So good reminders, and a good approach for some that might lean a little heavy on the email communication, as we're so virtual in today's world. So to transition to our final conversation around communication, I talk about surround sound and being firing on all cylinders as a thoughtful leader to convey a message, being present, to have it received. So I'm curious how you go about reinforcing and connecting with people in communications and closing the loop around the communication that you've shared to bring it home. What's your thought?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll use a professional and a business example for this to say that I really think, there's lots of different niches of communication where you could say that for this particular example or this item, one form of communication would suffice. I think in general, if we talk just professionally for a minute, and you and I had talked even before we kind of went live here about the concept of executive presence. I think if you're looking to build a career in leadership, an executive presence, so to speak, you have to be able to command all forms of communication. So when I think about my professional life for a minute and forget about sports coaching or community involvement, when I think about my professional life, I think that I need to be able to command written communication from time to time that is clear and concise. In a world that we lived in for a couple of years with COVID, where everything was done over Zoom and the computer, I also need to be able to command turning my video on and conveying a message to an audience like we're doing now with technology. And I have to be able to still get in person, eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly with human beings when people can judge my body language in addition to my verbal message. And if you're building a professional executive presence, you have to put time, thought, and energy into all of those things. And the best pro tip I can give you is you have to, it's an art, it's not a science, but you have to study the art of, are you relying on one too much versus another? And how do you strike the right balance for what, your business, your profession, your audience would need? I can say that the world that I live in financial services, I need a blend of all three. And I tend to notice when it's been a little while since people have heard my voice or seen my face. They might have gotten 3 or 4 emails from me in a 30-day window, but maybe I should record a video message this month, or maybe I should host a Zoom call and get 100 people on the line and say the same thing I might have said in an email, but say it in a live setting where people can ask some questions or hear my sincerity and just figure out the different balance there. So it is an art, Susan. It's hard, knowing that it's a broad audience who listens to you across probably many professions and community endeavors and things like that. But to me, the surround sound piece is that the reason we have all these types of communication is because they're effective in different ways. Text messaging, super efficient, as is email. But seeing somebody in person, we're still human beings and need human connection sometimes to feel cared about.
Gosh, Brian, you're just so good at this communication. I was just like, wow, great stuff. So again, varied forms of communication, not relying too much on one type, making sure you're hitting them at different angles. But I cannot say this eloquent as you did, so I'm just going to stop there. You did say a pro tip. I did want to ask if there was one tip that you want our audience to take away. Was that your pro tip, or is there another tip that you have for our audience as a takeaway as we prepare to wrap up?
I would say that there's 2. One is, if you've ever observed someone who you think is a gifted communicator, whether it's someone you saw give a speech or someone who wrote an email.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is that their gift in communication is not an accident.
Yeah.
It's not that they were born out of the womb and just started yapping and talking and they're brilliantly communicated. They have a process to take their time and prepare and to think through it. And so the pro tip first and foremost is, in order to improve communication, dedicate more time. And I don't just mean practicing a speech if you're giving a speech. It could be proofreading an email or letting it sit for a couple of hours and coming back and rereading it again and see if it all still makes sense and lands the way you want it to.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who have a gift in written or verbal communication prep. That's for sure. The second thing I would say is, don't ever stop seeking feedback. I can tell you, Susan, that again, I'll use the professional sense. I give a presentation once a month. It's the last Monday of every month. I do a presentation for several hundred people in my region in financial services.
Uh-huh.
I ask at least 3 or 4 people every month, how did it go? Back to the point about reception. Previously, I love what I say, right? I wouldn't say it if I didn't think it was going to go well. But I need a couple of people who I trust that can say that was really good, or that wasn't as good as you thought it probably would be in terms of a section or a component or even a one-liner. It could be anything. So never stop seeking feedback, no matter, how many accolades or how good you think you are. It's a journey that has no final end.
All right. Well stated. Prep, number 1, pro tip. Number 2, actually, because you gave us one before. So prep, the folks that are great communicators prepare. It's not by accident. They take the time to dedicate toward it. And number 3 is to seek feedback, ensure that the message is received in the way intended. And it's an opportunity to continue to grow. As you mentioned, it's a journey. It's not quite the destination. So some great tips there. Very well done. I expected nothing less, but I just want to compliment you on that. Very well said. So thank you, Brian, so much for our conversation today and sharing your expertise. And for our audience, we want to make sure that you are getting the information and receiving it as it was intended. So you can comment and let us know what your thoughts are. You can like and share. I'm hopeful at least one thing that was shared in our conversation will be of value to someone. And Brian, we do appreciate your contribution to that end. So as we bring this session to a close, this is just a quick reminder that at Truth Enterprise Partners, we are looking to create a world where diversity and truth are valued. We help leaders and individuals and organizations discover their true potential with consulting and coaching on talent development. So you can ask yourself, how are you and your team doing toward the surround sound communication? Whether you're looking to enhance or further leverage communication as part of your leadership style, we can help you with that. We have tools and techniques that can help you enable that performance. And you can learn more about us at truthenterprisepartners.com. You can email us at info@truthenterprisepartners.com or phone 612-237-1559. And also check us out on YouTube, all the podcast platforms. There's a variety of them available, and share with your friends or someone that could benefit from this conversation. And Brian Mora is available at brian.mora@ampf.com if you had any further questions for him. So again, we thank you for sharing your views on communication today, Brian. We appreciate you being our guest, and we thank you all for listening and joining in as well. This has been Real World Leadership with your moderator and leadership guru, Susan Johnson. We look forward to connecting with you again real soon.